Hi, my dear friends. I am welcoming you to the IFRS classes. I am welcoming you to the IFRS classes. This is about the accounting standards. So here we are completing the so many accounting standards. So in that now we have to be discussing the accounting standard called as revenue from revenue from contact with revenue from contact with customers Indian accounting standard 115. So in remaining ಇರತಕ್ಕಂತ ಒಂದು 4 accounting standards ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಮಗೆ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ಸ್ ಅರೈಸ್ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. So just theory part ಅಷ್ಟೇನೆ ನಾವು ಡಿಸ್ಕಸ್ ಮಾಡುವಂತದ್ದು. So in this revenue from contact with the customers Indian accounting standard 115, before we are going to discuss in this concept, we should know about the meaning of important terms. We should know about the meaning of important terms. What are those important terms here? The first one is contact. The first one is contract. What it means? The contract is nothing but here the contract is nothing but an agreement made between the two or more parties that creates the enforceable rights. Enforceable is nothing but legal rights, and obligations is nothing but objectives. Here contract is nothing but it is an agreement between the two or more parties. It is legally giving the rights and the objectives. So this is what we called as the contract. After that, the next another important term here, the next another important term here, contract asset. The next important term here, the contract asset. Here, what is meant by contract asset is nothing but the contract asset is nothing but an entity's right to consideration in exchange of goods and services that the entity has transferred to a customer when that right is conditioned on the something other than the passage of time. So what they are telling here, it is nothing but the transformation of the right of the asset to the customer. It is a transformation of the right of the asset to the customer here. So here entity gives the exclusive rights to the customers to use the asset. Entity gives the exclusive rights to the customers to use the asset. This type of asset contracts is existed in the organization. It gives a more revenue from the customers. ಗ್ರಾಹಕರಿಂದ ನಾವು ಅತಿ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಒಂದು ಆದಾಯವನ್ನು ಗಳಿಸಿಕೊಳ್ತಾ ಹೋಗ್ತೀವಿ. So this gives the high revenue to the organizations. Therefore, it must and should record the each and every contract of asset transaction in a separate book and the separate records. So it is maintained in the separate accounting standard. That is what we called as revenue from contract with customers, Indian accounting standard 115. So the contract of assets. After that, the next one is the contract of liability. Next one is the contract of liability. Here the contract of liability is nothing but an entity's obligation to transfer the goods or services to the customers for which the entity has received consideration from the customers. So it means, so they are receiving, our organization is receiving the lump sum amount from the customers to pay the cash or the consideration. We transfer in certain goods to the customers. This type of contracts what we called as the contract of liability. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಲಯಬಿಲಿಟಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವೇನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ, ಸೊ ನಾವು ಪೇಮೆಂಟ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾಗಿರುವಂತಹ ಲೈಬಿಲಿಟೀಸ್ಗೆ ನಾವು ಅವ್ರ ಹತ್ರದಿಂದ ಅಮೌಂಟ್ ರಿಸೀವ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿರ್ತೀವಿ. ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಎ ಲಯಬಿಲಿಟಿ, ನಾವು ಪೇ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಇನ್ಸ್ಟೆಡ್ ಆಫ್ ಪೇಯಿಂಗ್ ದಿ ಕನ್ಸಿಡರೇಷನ್ ವಿ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಫರಿಂಗ್ ದಿ ಗೂಡ್ಸ್ ಟು ದಿ ಕಸ್ಟಮರ್ಸ್. ದಿಸ್ ಟೈಪ್ ಆಫ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ವಾಟ್ ವಿ ಕಾಲ್ಡ್ as contract of liability. So this three is very important terms. What is meant by contract, what is meant by contract asset, and what is meant by contract liability. After this, the most important objective we should know that the objective of the revenue from customers, this is the objective we should know that the objective of the revenue from contract with customers, Indian Accounting Standard 115. What is the main objective here? The main objective is nothing but the objective of this standard is to establish the principles that an entity shall apply to report useful information to the users of financial statement about the nature, amount, timing, and uncertainty of the revenue and cash flows arising from the contract with the customers. What is this objective? Is nothing but the objective of this standard. It must and should give the principal guidelines to the organization. The basic objective is to give the guidelines to the organization about what, about the reporting of the information, about the reporting of information to the users. Who is the users here? They are called as the external users or the internal users, that are the shareholders, stakeholders, and the creditors, investors. All these persons, what we call as, they are the users of their organizational information, whether it is a financial information or it is any type of information. It is what we call as, those information is very essentially we should give the users of the organization. They analyzing, they interpreting, they deciding what type of amount, what type of money we are investing further. So we giving the information regarding the nature of the contract, and amount how we are utilizing from these revenues from the contract, and uncertainties, timings of the revenue, cash inflows and cash outflows. What is the revenue we are getting from this type of contracts? Each and every information regarding the revenue from contracts we are mentioned in the financial statement. Those information is clearly given to the shareholders, stakeholders, that is what we called as users of financial information. This is the objective of revenue from contracts with the customers, Indian Accounting Standard 115. After that, the scope here. So how we are applying, so in what situation we are applying this here, the scope. So this is applied to all type of contacts. This is applied to all type of contact. There is no exemption here. An entity shall apply this standard to all type of contracts. But what is the exception here? So we are not, except we are not applying to the lease contracts. We are not applying to the lease contracts, and the insurance contracts. Both are separately we are discussing in the Indian Accounting Standard leases and Indian Accounting Standard 104 insurance contracts. These both are discussed in the separate accounting standards. They given the separate guidelines, therefore it is not applied to the lease contract as well as insurance contracts, but in all type of contracts we are applying this accounting standard. After this, the recognition criteria. After this, the recognition criteria here, how we are recognizing it is an the contracts, how we are identifying, the identification is taken place here. It is a most important concept. Here in this, identifying the contract, it is purely related to the revenue from the contracts of this industry, of this Indian accounting standard. An entity shall account for the contract with a customer that is within the scope of the standard only, means within the limitations of the standard. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಈ ಒಂದು ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡರ್ಡ್ ನ ಲಿಮಿಟ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವೇನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕಾಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಒಂದು ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸಾಕ್ಷನ್ಸ್, ಯಾಕಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಲೀಸಸ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಐಡೆಂಟಿಫೈ ಮಾಡೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಲೀಸಸ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಐಡೆಂಟಿಫೈ ಮಾಡೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ವಿ ಆರ್ ಓನ್ಲಿ ಐಡೆಂಟಿಫೈ ವೇರ್ ದ ಸ್ಕೋಪ್ ಈಸ್ ಅಪ್ಲಿಕೇಬಲ್. ಎಲ್ಲಿವರೆಗೂ ಈ ಸ್ಕೋಪ್ ಅನ್ನುವಂಥದ್ದು ಅಪ್ಲೈ ಆಗುತ್ತೋ ಅಲ್ಲಿವರೆಗೂ ಮಾತ್ರನೇ ನಾವು ಇದನ್ನ ಐಡೆಂಟಿಫೈ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. ದಿಸ್ ಇಸ್ ದ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ದಿ ರೆವೆನ್ಯೂಸ್ ಫ್ರಮ್ ದಿ ಕಸ್ಟಮರ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ. ಸೊ ದೀಸ್ will be satisfy the criteria. This will be satisfy the criteria. Criteria na satisfy ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾಗಿರುತ್ತೆ, conditions na satisfy ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. What are those conditions? Are they terms here? The first one is The first one is the parties to the contract have approved the contract. The contract must be the legally enforceable. Andre contract ಏನಾಗಿರಬೇಕು? It must be legally enforceable. ಕಾನೂನಿನ ಮುಖಾಂತರ ಅಸ್ತಿತ್ವವನ್ನ ಪಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿರಬೇಕು. And the second one here, the entity can identify each party's rights regarding the goods or services to be transferred. So here the entity means organization must and should identify each party's rights, whether they are transferring the goods or services. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಎರಡನೇ ಕಂಡೀಷನ್ ಏನಿರುತ್ತಪ್ಪ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ, ಸೊ ಅವರು ಗೂಡ್ಸ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಸರ್ವಿಸಸ್ ನ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಫರ್ ಮಾಡಿರ್ಬೇಕಾಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಯಾವುದೇ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲೂ ಅಷ್ಟೇ ಗೂಡ್ಸ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಸರ್ವಿಸಸ್ ನ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಫರ್ ಮಾಡಿಲ್ಲ ಸೊ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಆರ್ಗನೈಸೇಷನ್ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಐಡೆಂಟಿಫೈ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ, ಸೊ ಈ ಒಂದು ಅಕೌಂಟಿಂಗ್ ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡರ್ಡ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಇದನ್ನ ಮೆನ್ಷನ್ ಮಾಡೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಆಫ್ಟರ್ ದಟ್ ದ ಥರ್ಡ್ ಒನ್ ಹಿಯರ್ the entity can identify the payment terms for the goods and services to be transferred. So it must be satisfy the payment terms. Andre ಪಾವತಿ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಪೇಮೆಂಟ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಏನು ಟರ್ಮ್ಸ್ ಅಂಡ್ ರೂಲ್ಸ್ ಅಂಡ್ ರೆಗ್ಯುಲೇಷನ್ಸ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, ಆ ಟರ್ಮ್ಸ್ ಅಂಡ್ ರೂಲ್ಸ್ ಅಂಡ್ ರೆಗ್ಯುಲೇಷನ್ಸ್ ನ ಕಂಪಲ್ಸರಿ ಆಗಿ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ಒಂದು ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸಾಕ್ಷನ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಫುಲ್ಫಿಲ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅಸೆಟ್ ನಾದ್ರೂ ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡಿರ್ಬೇಕಾಗಿರುತ್ತೆ, ಇಲ್ಲ ಲೈಬಿಲಿಟಿನ ಪೇಮೆಂಟ್ ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿರ್ಬೇಕಾಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಟೋಟಲಿ the customers is purely related to the organizational transactions. So this is recognized as the contract or identified as the contract. After that the measurement criteria. So the measurement ಯಾವ ರೀತಿ ನಾವು ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಹೋಗ್ತೀವಿ? Here measurement is done. So these measurements is done with the help of the most important concept. It is here when a performance obligation is satisfied, andre so rules and regulations, so objectives, so criteria then satisfy ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. So these rules and regulations and the criteria will be satisfied means an entity shall recognize as a revenue amount, so the transaction price that is allocated to that performance obligation. Means here they are measuring these contracts based on the how much revenue is generated these transactions. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಇದನ್ನ ನಾವು ಮೆಜರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಯಾವ ರೀತಿ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಪ್ಪ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ, ಎಷ್ಟು ಇದು ರೆವಿನ್ಯೂ ಜನರೇಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದೆ, ಸೊ ಆ ಬೇಸಿಸ್ ಮೇಲೆ ನಾವು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಇದನ್ನ ಮೆಜರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಹೋಗ್ತೀವಿ. After that the next one here, disclosure. So what are the most important terms, items we should disclose in our ಫೈನಾನ್ಷಿಯಲ್ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್? ನಮ್ಮ ಫೈನಾನ್ಷಿಯಲ್ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವ್ಯಾವ ಒಂದು ಟರ್ಮ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನ ನಾವು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಡಿಸ್ಕ್ಲೋಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ, ಯಾವ್ಯಾವ ಒಂದು ಮೋಸ್ಟ್ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಐಟಮ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನ ನಾವು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಡಿಸ್ಕ್ಲೋಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಈ ಫೈನಾನ್ಷಿಯಲ್ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವ್ಯಾವ ಇನ್ಫಾರ್ಮೇಶನ್ ನಾವು ಡಿಸ್ಕ್ಲೋಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಹೋಗ್ತೀವಪ್ಪ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ, an entity shall disclose qualitative and quantitative information about all of the following. Means each and every qualitative information as well as the quantitative information, both information we are given in the financial statement. Both information we are given in the financial statements. The first one is it's a contract with customers. If any contracts made with the customers, this information must and should given. And the second one is the significant judgments and the changes is made in the judgments made in applying this standard to those contracts. If any obligations, if any complaints is arising, so it is in the law, it is in the judgment. So all these judgments will be put it in the financial statements. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ, ಯಾವುದೇ ಒಂದು ಜಡ್ಜ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್, ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಕೆಲವು ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಲೀಗಲಿ ಎನ್ಫೋರ್ಸಬಿಲಿಟಿ ಇದ್ರೆ, ಕಾನೂನಿನ ಮುಖಾಂತರ ಲೀಗಲ್ ಆಗಿ ರಿಜಿಸ್ಟರ್ಡ್ ಆಗಿದ್ರೆ, ಸೊ ಅದು ಕಂಪ್ಲೇಂಟ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನ ಹೋಗಿರುತ್ತೆ, ಸೊ ಅದು ಕೋರ್ಟ್ ನ ಮುಖಾಂತರ ಜಡ್ಜ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಬಂದಿರುತ್ತೆ, ಸೊ ಆ ಜಡ್ಜ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಸಹ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಮೆನ್ಷನ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಅಂಡ್ ದ ಥರ್ಡ್ ಒನ್ ಇಸ್ ಎನಿ ಅಸೆಟ್ಸ್ ರೆಕಗ್ನೈಸ್ಡ್ ಫ್ರಮ್ ದಿ ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ to obtain or fulfill the contract with the customer. Any type of cost or expenditure incurred related to the contract, it is also we should disclose in the financial statements. These are all the disclosures of revenue from customers, Indian Accounting Standard 115. This is about this standard. After that, the next accounting standard is the next accounting standard is the most important accounting standard. Here, this accounting standard called as the provisions, contingent assets, and the contingent liabilities. Indian accounting standard 37. Indian accounting standard 37 here. So first of all, we should know the important terms meanings or the definition. Here, what is the important terms meanings? Among those important terms, we should discuss about the provision. So what is meant by provision? A provision is a liability which can be measured only by using a substantial degree of estimation. So provision. So we heard this word in so many times. Provision. What it means? A provision is nothing but it is a liability to the organization. It is measured to the suitable degree of estimation. So we are estimating how much of the liability is there in the organization. This is the 2 marks question. Give the meaning of provision. Provision nothing but is a liability which measured only by the substantial degree of estimation. After that, the next one here, liability. What it means, the liability? Liability is nothing but a liability. A liability is a present obligation of the enterprises arising from the past events, the settlement of which is expected to result in an outflow from the enterprise of the resources embodying economic benefits. So here, liability. In this meaning, they given the IFRS meaning. They are not given the accounting meaning. So in this accounting, liability is nothing but it is a loan to the organization. Here in the IFRS, liability is arising due to the past events, due to the 10 years or 20 years or 30 years information. They are arising. ಅಂದ್ರೆ liability ಅನ್ನುವಂಥದ್ದು past events ಇಂದ ಅಂದ್ರೆ past transactions ಇಂದ 10 years before transactions ಇಂದ 20 years before transactions ಇಂದ ಅರೈಸ್ ಆಗಿರುವಂತಹ ಒಂದು ಅಬ್ಲಿಗೇಷನ್ ಅನ್ನ ಒಂದು ಆಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟಿವ್ ಅನ್ನ ನಾವೇನಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಪ್ಪ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಲಯಬಿಲಿಟಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ಸೊ ದಿಸ್ ಈಸ್ ದ ಮೋಸ್ಟ್ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಟರ್ಮ್ ಹಿಯರ್. ಆಫ್ಟರ್ ದಟ್ ದ ಕಾಂಟಿಂಜೆಂಟ್ ಲಯಬಿಲಿಟಿ. After that, the contingent liability. What is meant by contingent liability? A contingent is nothing but uncertain liability. We don't know. It is a difficult liability. It is an uncertain liability. A contingent liability is a possible obligation that arises from the past events. It is also arising from the past events and existence of which will be confirmed only by the occurrence or non-occurrence of one or more such uncertain future events, not only within the control of the enterprise. So what it means here, contingent liability is nothing but the uncertain liability. It is arising due to the past events as well as the occurrence and non-occurrence is depending upon the future events. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ, ಕಾಂಟಿಂಜೆಂಟ್ ಲಯಬಿಲಿಟಿ ಅನ್ನುವಂಥದ್ದು ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಅನ್ಸರ್ಟೈನ್ ಲಯಬಿಲಿಟಿ ಆಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಈ ಅನ್ಸರ್ಟೈನ್ ಲಯಬಿಲಿಟಿ ಸೊ ಇದು ಪಾಸ್ಟ್ ಇವೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಇಂದ ಅರೈಸ್ ಆಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಇದು ಇದೆಯಾ ಇಲ್ವಾ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಆರ್ ಅಕ್ಕರೆನ್ಸ್ ಆರ್ ನಾನ್ ಅಕ್ಕರೆನ್ಸ್ ನಾವು ಐಡೆಂಟಿಫೈ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ, ಸೊ ಯು ಮಸ್ಟ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಶುಡ್ ಚೆಕ್ ಔಟ್ ದ ಅನ್ಸರ್ಟೈನ್ ಫ್ಯೂಚರ್ ಇವೆಂಟ್ಸ್. So it is under the control of the enterprise. So this is about the meaning of contingent liability. After that, the next most important term here, contingent asset. The next most important term here, contingent asset. What is meant by contingent asset? Here the contingent asset is nothing but a contingent asset. A contingent asset is a possible asset. Contingent asset is a possible asset that arises from past events, the existence of which will be confirmed only by the occurrence or non-occurrence of the more uncertain future events, not only with the control of the enterprise. So ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ, ಸೊ ಪಾಸ್ಟ್ ಇವೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಇಂದ ಅರೈಸ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, ಬಟ್ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಪಾಸಿಬಲ್ ಅಸೆಟ್. ಪಾಸಿಬಲ್ ಅಸೆಟ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವೇನ್ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದೀವಿ, ಸೊ ಕಾಂಟಿಂಜೆಂಟ್ ಅಸೆಟ್ ಇಸ್ ನಥಿಂಗ್ ಬಟ್ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ಎ ಅನ್ಸರ್ಟೈನ್ ಅಸೆಟ್, ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಎ ಪಾಸಿಬಲ್ ಅಸೆಟ್. ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಅರೈಸಸ್. ಯಾವ್ದ್ರಿಂದ ಇದನ್ನು ಅರೈಸ್ ಆಗುತ್ತಪ್ಪ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಪಾಸ್ಟ್ ಇವೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಇಂದ ಅರೈಸ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಹೋಗುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಪಾಸ್ಟ್ ಇವೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಇಂದ ಅರೈಸ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಸೊ ಇದನ್ನು ಸಹ ನಾವು ಕಾಂಟಿಂಜೆಂಟ್ ಅಸೆಟ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ನಾವು ಕನ್ಸಿಡರ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಹೋಗ್ತೀವಿ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ 2 marks ಗೆ ಕೇಳುವಂತ ಮೋಸ್ಟ್ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಕ್ವಶನ್ ಏನಪ್ಪಾ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ so the what is meant by contingent liability, what is meant by contingent asset, and what is the provision, what is the liability. After this, the next important here objective, the objective. So why we have to be introducing this accounting standard is nothing but so the basic objective of this standard to give the appropriate recognition criteria and measurement basis are applied to the provisions, contingent liabilities, and sufficient information must and should disclose in the notes to the financial statements to enable the users to understand the nature and timing and amount of the each and every transaction. Here, the basic objective of this standard is must and should given the guidelines regarding the recognition. ಯಾವ ತರ ನಾವು ಕಾಂಟಿಂಜೆಂಟ್ ಅಸೆಟ್ ನ ರೆಕಗ್ನಿಷನ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು, ಅದನ್ನ ಮೆಷರ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು, ಯಾವ್ಯಾವ ಒಂದು ಬೇಸಿಸ್ ಅನ್ನ ನಾವು ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಅಂಡ್ ದಿ ಫೈನಾನ್ಷಿಯಲ್ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ನ ನಾವು ಪ್ರಿಪೇರ್ ಮಾಡುವಾಗ ಸೊ ವಾಟ್ ಬೇಸಿಸ್ ವಿ ಆರ್ ಪ್ರಿಪೇರಿಂಗ್ ದಿ ಫೈನಾನ್ಷಿಯಲ್ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್, ದಿಸ್ ಬೇಸಿಸ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ಇಸ್ ಗಿವನ್. ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ, this basis also is given in the financial statement. All this information is purely related to the provisions, contingent assets, and the contingent liabilities. Each and every information is clearly given to understand the users of the organization. ಆ ಒಂದು ಕಂಪನಿಯ ಯೂಸರ್ಸ್ ಯಾರ್ಯಾರು ಇರ್ತಾರೆ ಅವರೆಲ್ಲರೂ ಸಹ ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದಕ್ಕಾಗಿ ಈ ಒಂದು ಆಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟಿವ್, ಈ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಾವಿಷನ್ಸ್, ಕಾಂಟಿಂಜೆಂಟ್ ಅಸೆಟ್ಸ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಕಾಂಟಿಂಜೆಂಟ್ ಲಯಬಿಲಿಟೀಸ್ ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ಅಕೌಂಟಿಂಗ್ ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡರ್ಡ್ 37 ಅನ್ನ ನಾವು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಮೇಂಟೈನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಹೋಗ್ತೀವಿ. After that, scope. So how we are applying this standard? This standard is applied to the standard is applied in accounting for provisions and the contingent liabilities and in dealing with the contingent asset. Adra all type of provisions, contingent asset and liabilities ಗೆ ಇದನ್ನ ನಾವು ಅಪ್ಲೈ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್ ಯಾವುದಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವು ಅಪ್ಲೈ ಮಾಡೋದಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ those resulting from financial instrument that are carried at fair value. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಫೈನಾನ್ಷಿಯಲ್ ಇನ್ಸ್ಟ್ರೂಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಸೊ ಪ್ರಾಮಿಸರಿ ನೋಟ್ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಇಲ್ಲಾಂದ್ರೆ ಚೆಕ್ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಇಲ್ಲ ಬಿಲ್ ಆಫ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಚೇಂಜ್ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಈ ಒಂದು ಫೈನಾನ್ಷಿಯಲ್ ಇನ್ಸ್ಟ್ರೂಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಏನೇನಿರುತ್ತೆ ಆ ಫೈನಾನ್ಷಿಯಲ್ ಇನ್ಸ್ಟ್ರೂಮೆಂಟ್ ಫೇರ್ ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅದರ ಒಂದು ಕ್ಯಾರಿಯಿಂಗ್ ಅಮೌಂಟ್ ಅನ್ನುವಂಥದ್ದು ಫೇರ್ ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂ ಆಗಿದೆ. ಸೊ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಈ ಒಂದು ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡರ್ಡ್ ಅಪ್ಲೈ ಮಾಡಲ್ಲ. ಅಂಡ್ ದ ಸೆಕೆಂಡ್ ಒನ್ ಇಸ್ ದೋಸ್ ರಿಸಲ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ಫ್ರಮ್ ಎಕ್ಸಿಕ್ಯೂಟರಿ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ಸ್. ಎಕ್ಸಿಕ್ಯೂಟರಿ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ಸ್, ಸೊ ಈ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಏನಾಗಿರ್ಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ಫೈನಾನ್ಸ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ಆಪರೇಟಿಂಗ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೇಕಾಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಎಕ್ಸಿಕ್ಯೂಟರಿ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಇಂಪ್ಲಿಮೆಂಟೇಷನ್ ಮಾಡುವಂತ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಈ ಒಂದು ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡರ್ಡ್ ನ ಅಪ್ಲೈ ಮಾಡೋದಿಲ್ಲ. Here the disclosures. After that, the next one is the disclosures. What are the disclosures we are made here? The disclosure is the very important point. So what information we should disclose? The information here for each class of provision and enterprise should be disclosed. The information ಅನ್ನು disclose ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಮಾತ್ರ the carrying amount at the beginning and at the end of the accounting period. ಅಂದ್ರೆ at the end, at the beginning ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ 1st April ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವ ಒಂದು ಅಮೌಂಟ್ಸ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, and the 31st March ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಇಯರ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವೆಲ್ಲ ಒಂದು ಅಮೌಂಟ್ಸ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ ಸೊ ಅದನ್ನ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಡಿಸ್ಕ್ಲೋಸ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಅಂಡ್ ದ ಸೆಕೆಂಡ್ ಒನ್ ಇಸ್ ಅಡಿಷನಲ್ ಪ್ರಾವಿಷನ್ಸ್ ಮೇಡ್ ಇನ್ ದಿ ಪೀರಿಯಡ್. ಸೊ ಅಡಿಷನಲ್ ಪ್ರಾವಿಷನ್ಸ್ ಏನಾದ್ರೂ ಸಹ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅಡಿಷನಲಿ ನಾವೇನಾದ್ರೂ ಲೈಬಿಲಿಟಿಯನ್ನ ಮೇಂಟೈನ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ಸೊ ಇನ್ಕ್ಲೂಡಿಂಗ್ ಇನ್ಕ್ರೀಸ್ ಟು ಎಕ್ಸಿಸ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ಪ್ರಾವಿಷನ್ಸ್. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಪ್ರಾವಿಷನ್ಸ್ ಈಗ ಆಲ್ರೆಡಿ ನಮಗೆ ಲೈಬಿಲಿಟಿ ಇದೆ, ಸೊ ಇನ್ ಕೇಸ್ ನಾವು ಅದನ್ನ ಏನಾದ್ರೂ ಇನ್ಕ್ರೀಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ರೆ ಸೊ ಆ ಒಂದು ಇನ್ಫಾರ್ಮೇಶನ್ ನಾವು ಡಿಸ್ಕ್ಲೋಸ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಅಂಡ್ ದ ಥರ್ಡ್ ಒನ್ ಇಸ್ ಅಮೌಂಟ್ಸ್ ಯೂಸ್ಡ್ ಡ್ಯೂರಿಂಗ್ ದ ಪೀರಿಯಡ್. ಸೊ ಯಾವ್ದಾದ್ರು ಅಮೌಂಟ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನು ಸಹ ನಾವು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅಸೆಟ್ ನ ಸೇಲ್ ಮಾಡಿದ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಇಲ್ಲಾಂದ್ರೆ ರಿಕವರಿ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿರುವಂತಹ ಒಂದು ಇನ್ಫಾರ್ಮೇಶನ್ ಆ ಒಂದು ಅಮೌಂಟ್ಸ್ ನಾವು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಡಿಸ್ಕ್ಲೋಸ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. And unused amounts reversed during the period. Unused amounts related to the contingent asset or the contingent liability, it is also disclosed in the financial statement. These are all the related to the provisions, contingent liabilities and contingent assets. After that, the next accounting standard we are moving here, events occurring after reporting period. Events occurring after reporting period. So what is meant by events occurring after the reporting period? So this is also one of the types of the Indian accounting standard. This is also the one of the type of the Indian accounting standard. So in this, first of all, we should know the what is meant by events occurring after the reporting period. What is meant by event occurring after the reporting period? So here, events occurring after the reporting period is nothing but events after the reporting period are those events or the transactions favorable and unfavorable that occur between the end of the reporting period and the date when the financial statements are approved by the board of directors in case of a company and by the corresponding approving authority in case of any other entity for issue. So this is what we call as events occurring after the reporting period. After the reporting period is nothing but, so we are reporting, already we are preparing the financial statement, already we are preparing the profit and loss account as well as the balance sheet of the organization. Then after that events or the payments or the purchases is made after the reporting period, that is what we call as events are arising or occurring after the reporting period. So this is recording in the books of accounts. So in which manner we are recording, how we are treating. So in the books of accounts, the entire information is given in this standard. This is the 2 marks question. Give the meaning of events after the reporting period. Events after the reporting period is nothing but these are the events arising or occurring after we giving the reporting to the top level management, after they getting this such type of events is arising in the organization. This is what we call as events arising or occurring after the reporting period. So what is the basic objective of this standard is nothing but, so Indian accounting standard 10 events after reporting period contains the requirement for when events after the end of the reporting period should be adjusted in the financial statement. This is very important concept. Why? Because after we are preparing all type of financial statements, so adjustments they are given. So in this problem, so many times in this problem we are also preparing the adjustment. ಕೆಲವು ಸಲ ನೀವು ಫೈನಾನ್ಷಿಯಲ್ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ನ ಪ್ರಿಪೇರ್ ಮಾಡುವಂತ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿರ್ತಾರೆ ನೋಡಿ. So adjustments, why they are given the adjustments? Those adjustment what we call as events occurring after the reporting period. So ಅದನ್ನ ನಾವೇನಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಪ್ಪ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಆ events reporting period ಆದ್ಮೇಲೆ ಅರೈಸ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಹೋಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. So ಹಾಗಾಗಿ what is the basic objective here? The objective of this standard, the objective of this standard is nothing but the first one. So the first basic objective here, when an entity should adjust its financial statements for events after the reporting period. So this is the first objective here. So when they are adjusting their transactions, they are not recorded, they are not entered in the financial statement. So this is the objective of this standard. They're giving the opportunity, they're giving the chance to the organization to adjust these transactions in their financial statement. This is the first objective. And the second objective is the disclosure that an entity should give about the date when the financial statements were approved for issue and about events after the reporting period. See, this is the second objective here. When the approval date is given, when they are disclosed their transactions, each and every information to disclose the transaction as well as to preparing the financial statement as well as so events occurring after the reporting period, how you are treated, each and every information guidelines they are given in this accounting standard. That is what we call as events reporting after the reporting period. Events occurred after the reporting period. The next one here, scope. Here the scope is nothing but, so the scope where we are applying this accounting standard, this accounting standard is applied, this accounting standard is applied. So in the accounting for disclosure of the events after the reporting. So if any transaction is occurred after the reporting period, then this Indian accounting standard we are applying here. After that, disclosure. What we are disclosing here? ಯಾವುದನ್ನ ನಾವು ತೋರಿಸ್ತೀವಿ ಒಂದು ಅಕೌಂಟಿಂಗ್ ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡರ್ಡ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ? ಡೇಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಅಪ್ರೂವಲ್ ಫಾರ್ ಇಶ್ಯೂ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ, ಯಾವ ಡೇಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಅಪ್ರೂವಲ್ ತಗೊಳ್ತಾ ಇದೀವಿ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಈ ಒಂದು ಅಕೌಂಟಿಂಗ್ ಪೀರಿಯಡ್ ಅನ್ನ ಯಾವ ಡೇಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಅಪ್ರೂವಲ್ ತಗೊಳ್ತಾ ಇದೀವಿ. ಸೊ ಇವೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನ ಯಾವ ಒಂದು ಡೇಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಅಡ್ಜಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದೀವಿ. An entity shall be disclosed the date when the financial statements were approved. The entire financial statements ಅನ್ನ it is right, it is examined, it is verified ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ನೀವು ಯಾವ ಒಂದು ಡೇಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅಪ್ರೂವಲ್ ತಗೋಬೇಕು. ಆಸ್ ವೆಲ್ ಆಸ್ ಸೊ ಅಡ್ಜಸ್ಟೆಡ್ ಅಕೌಂಟಿಂಗ್ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸಾಕ್ಷನ್ಸ್ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಇದ್ರೆ ಯಾವ ರೀತಿ ನೀವು ಫೈನಾನ್ಷಿಯಲ್ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅಮೆಂಡ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು, ತಿದ್ದುಪಡಿ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು, ಅಮೆಂಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು, ಚೇಂಜಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು. ಸೊ ಇದನ್ನ ನಾವು ಯಾವ ಡೇಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಚೇಂಜ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ವಿ, ಯಾವಾಗ ಚೇಂಜ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ವಿ, ಯಾವ ಒಂದು ಡೇಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಫೈನಾನ್ಷಿಯಲ್ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ನ ಅಪ್ರೂವಲ್ ತಗೊಂಡ್ವಿ, ಈಚ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಎವ್ರಿ ಇನ್ಫಾರ್ಮೇಶನ್ ಸಹ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಡಿಸ್ಕ್ಲೋಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಹೋಗ್ತೀವಿ. ಸೊ ದಿಸ್ ಇಸ್ ವಾಟ್ ವಿ ಕಾಲ್ಡ್ as date of the approval for issue. So it must and should disclose in the financial statement. This is related to the events occurring after the reporting period, Indian accounting standard 10. After this, the next accounting standard and the last accounting standard here, accounting policies, estimates and errors. Indian accounting standard 8. This is also the one of the Indian accounting standard. So this is explained in the Indian accounting standard 8 heading. Accounting policies, estimates and the errors they are prescribed, and the criteria for changing, selecting the accounting policies and the correction of the errors, each and every information they are clearly given in this accounting standard. So basically we should know the most important terms, meaning the first one here, most important terms meanings. Under that, the first one here, accounting policies. What is meant by accounting policies? This is the 2 marks question. What is meant by accounting policies? Accounting policies are the specific principles, basis, conventions, rules and practices applied by the entity in preparing the and presenting the financial statement. This is the 2 marks question. So accounting policies is nothing but it's the rules and regulations. It is the practices, whether they are following the single entry system or double entry system. So each and every systems, methods and their basis and the principles what they are following to prepare the financial statement, the entire what we called as the accounting policies. After this, the next most important question here, what are the prior period errors? What are these prior period errors? Here prior period errors is nothing but they are the omission from and misstatement in and the entity's financial statements for one or more prior period arising from a failure to use or misuse of a reliable information. Prior period errors is nothing but error means mistake. Error means mistake. They are omitted mistakes, they are the misrepresentation, misstatements, they are failure to use the financial information or reliable information to prepare the financial statement. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಾಗಿರುತ್ತೆ, ಆ ಒಂದು ಫೈನಾನ್ಷಿಯಲ್ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಅನ್ನ ಪ್ರಾಪರ್ ಆಗಿ ಯುಟಿಲೈಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ತೀರಾ ಒಂದು ಮಿಸ್ಟೇಕ್ಸ್ ಮಾಡಿರ್ತಾರೆ. ಸೊ ಆ ಟೈಪ್ ಆಫ್ ಮಿಸ್ಟೇಕ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನ ನಾವು ಏನು ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಪ್ಪ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಪ್ರಿಯರ್ ಪೀರಿಯಡ್ ಮಿಸ್ಟೇಕ್ಸ್ ಆರ್ ಎರರ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ನಾವು ಕರಿತೀವಿ. After this, the next most important question here, the next most important question here, retrospective application. What it means? Retrospective application is the applying a new accounting policy to the transactions, other events and the conditions as if that policy had always been applied. Retrospective application is nothing but applying the new accounting policies to the transactions, events and conditions. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಒಂದು ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ಗೆ ಹೊಸದಾದಂತ ಒಂದು ಅಕೌಂಟಿಂಗ್ ಪಾಲಿಸೀಸ್ ಅನ್ನ ನಾವು ಅಪ್ಲೈ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದೀವಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ, ಸೊ ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ವಾಟ್ ವಿ ಕಾಲ್ಡ್ as retrospective application ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಕನ್ಸಿಡರ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. After that, the next one here, what is retrospective restatement? What is retrospective restatement. Here, retrospective restatement is nothing but retrospective restatement is correcting the recognition, measurement, and disclosure of the amounts of the elements of the financial statement as if prior period error had never occurred. So what happens here? Retrospective restatement is nothing but it is the correcting the statement, recorrecting the statement of the recognition criteria if they done in the mistake, any mistake in the recognition criteria, if they done any mistake in the measurement criteria, if they done any mistake in the disclosure criteria, each and every mistakes will be corrected in the retrospective restatement. These are all they are asking for 2 marks questions. After that, the next one here, objective. What is the basic and fundamental objective of this accounting standard? Here the objective of this standard is to give the criteria and the conditions and the guidelines relating to the accounting policies, accounting treatment, disclosures, and the changes. If any changes is made in the accounting policies, you should change it and they correct the mistakes. Each and every guidelines they are given like this. This is the objective they are given. What is the objective here? To give the guidelines regarding the accounting policies, transactions, treatment, and the correcting the mistakes. And after this, the scope. What it means? The scope is nothing but here when we are applying the standard is nothing but, so in the selecting and applying these accounting policies and accounting for changes, if any changes or corrections is made in these transactions, we should apply this accounting standard. ಅಂದ್ರೆ accounting policies ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡರ್ಡ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಾದರೂ ಚೇಂಜಸ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂದಾಗ ಸೊ ನಾವೇನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ, ಈ ಒಂದು ಅಕೌಂಟಿಂಗ್ ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡರ್ಡ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನ ಇಶ್ಯೂ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ, ಅಪ್ಲೈ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. And after this, the last one is the disclosure. So even the accounting standards ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಏನ್ ಡಿಸ್ಕ್ಲೋಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಹೋಗ್ತೀವಪ್ಪ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ, an entity shall disclose the nature and amount of the change in the accounting estimate that has an effect in the current period or is expected to have an effect in the future period. In case ಏನಾದರೂ accounting prior period ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಚೇಂಜಸ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ, ಅಕೌಂಟಿಂಗ್ ಪಾಲಿಸೀಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಚೇಂಜಸ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ, ಸೊ ಎಂಟೈರ್ ಅಕೌಂಟಿಂಗ್ ಇನ್ಫಾರ್ಮೇಶನ್ ಅನ್ನ ಫೈನಾನ್ಷಿಯಲ್ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಡಿಸ್ಕ್ಲೋಸ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ದಿಸ್ ಇಸ್ ದಿ ಡಿಸ್ಕ್ಲೋಜರ್ ಆಫ್ ದಿಸ್ ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡರ್ಡ್. ಸೊ in this standard we are discussing here each and every most important concepts. So in this accounting standard, so it is the 2 marks questions. What is the meant by accounting policies, and what are the period errors, and what is the retrospective application, and what is the retrospective restatement? These are all they are asking for the 2 marks. So now we are ending the all accounting standards explanation. The next class we are moving to the problems.